Alrighty, my name is Kin Lane. Oh, there we go. Now I think we're live. All right, my name is Kin Lane. I'm the API Evangelist, and I've been starting to do more of these Google Hangouts as I'm looking to travel a little bit less in 2016. So I'm just looking to kick off in smart conversations with really smart people. And today I have Wade from Zapier. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me, Ken. So my name's Wade. I'm one of three co-founders and CEO here at Zapier. So that's probably the first thing to figure out is how to say the company name.
Yeah.
Zapier makes you happier. We've heard every variation of it. Zapier, Zapier, you name it. But Zapier is the one we like to call it. So,
Gotcha.
yep. So that's kind of who I am.
Well, thanks for and I think I've actually been in another conversation been told how to say it properly. So
You know,
hopefully the second time's a charm for me because I recall this before.
yeah, I tell people all the time, as long as you talk about us, like it's fine. You can get the pronunciation wrong. It's no big deal.
It's all good. Well, so from my standpoint as API evangelist, I have a section that I call reciprocity. I came up with this. I didn't come up with this word, but I applied this word back in 2012, 13 to describe what it is that you guys do, because you guys are kind of the poster child of it by my research, and that I and all my slides say this is how you do it. And why I call it reciprocity is because between countries we have reciprocity agreements, how trade and how things work. And I
hmm
feel like as more of our lives live in the cloud, and and both individually and as a business, this is how more of our lives are being conducted and operated.
hmm
And you guys enable that. That's how I see. So for the sake of my audience, what do you guys do?
So Zapier really makes like APIs accessible for like kind of just regular Joes, right? Specifically, we have about 600 apps, mostly in like the SaaS B2B space, and allow end users to set up automations between these two. So you can set up, a simple thing might be uh, every time I get a new email in Gmail, let's go ahead and save the attachments to Dropbox, right? Like that's a very simple version of this. Um, but now we've launched MultiSteps apps a couple of weeks ago. You can start to expand on those and like build out even deeper workflows. So you could set up maybe a rule that's like every time I get a lead on my site, an email address, let's go ahead and pass that over to full contact and look up, more details about that email address. Like see if we can fetch the LinkedIn account, the Twitter account, the Facebook account that's associated with that email address. And then let's go ahead and log that into our CRM, Salesforce, whatever. And then let's go ahead and post that to Slack to say we've got a new lead, right? So you can kind of chain these things along. But none of this requires coding. You don't even have to know what APIs are or that they even exist. You can just kind of through a little, UI set these rules and automations up.
Nice, nice. I mean, this is the my vision of APIs as I see it, because
hmm
it's great that we can build web and mobile apps, software as a service, but connecting people, allowing them to perform the meaningful processes they need to survive every day in their business or their employment, or just for me, freelancer life, like
hmm
being able to scale who you are and what you do without hiring more resources, and when you don't have developer resources available to you.
hmm
So it's super important to me. So how do you guys go about deciding what apps or business, workflows to enable in this space? What prompts you to connect to services?
Sure. So when we first started, it was us just kind of like guessing at what would be popular. We definitely targeted SaaS and B2B is kind of where that was small business was really who we wanted to help. And so the tools that we picked were things like MailChimp and QuickBooks and Salesforce and the kind of tools that are pretty popular in those circles. And so we would just guess and say like, hey, those seem popular, let's build those. Uh, then over time, we got more and more popular, and people would ask, "Hey, how can I add my app into Zapier?" Right? And so that's when we designed the first version of the developer platform, which actually allows people who are API providers to hook their APIs up into Zapier and then expose those as triggers and actions to our end customers. And so today, we don't really add many of the apps to Zapier. It's like 99% third-party vendors saying like, hey, this is something that's going to be really helpful for us because our customers need to be connected to their own broader ecosystem of apps. We hook it into Zapier and they can get that kind of out of the box without us having to do all this API work to make it happen.
Yeah, for me, that's one of the most important aspects of this. I see that as kind of paying it forward. When you're building services on top of APIs, you should act like an API provider and have APIs and enable that self-service, that sort of scaling. I think that's the logical, sensible a way to approach that. And so how much of the latest? So let's talk about MultiSteps, because the two most important things that you've done recently for me are MultiSteps and then kind of code transformations going on there. So let's start with MultiSteps. So is there any limit to this? Can I connect as many steps as I want? What's the
so you can pretty much connect as many steps as you want. I think one of the things, MultiSteps, right, it allows you to have multiple actions, right? Here's a trigger and then do as many actions as you want. But probably one of the more interesting pieces for API people that is in this launch is that there's actually a new action type called searches or lookups. And so if you're familiar with APIs, which I'm assuming most of you are, this is like the classic just, do a GET request to see if there is a record that exists like that contains this entity, right? And if it does, hey, let's use that data in subsequent, calls, subsequent actions, right? So that really adds a lot of power because you can do something as simple as like, hey, I want to create an invoice in QuickBooks, but I need to attach it to a customer. So you can do something like, I get a FreshBook or PayPal, sale comes through. Let's go ahead and find or create a customer inside of QuickBooks. And then as the second action, we'll go ahead and create that invoice attached to either that customer that was found or the customer that was created by Zapier. So that adds like kind of a lot of the search point component of it adds a lot of power.
Yeah, this adds several dimensions. The A to B that you guys have been historically, this happens over here, do this, and is pretty powerful. When you think about APIs, you can pretty much do anything under the sun. But when you add MultiSteps, you inject that search and other sort of code transformations in there. Basically, this is orchestration. That could be as simple or as complex or as nuanced as you want it to be.
Yeah, exactly. And like with the code steps you mentioned, this is just like there are a lot of our users who they may not be like full-time engineers, software engineers, right? This isn't necessarily like C++ programmers, right? But they know how to hack around and do a little bit, do some basic calls. And that's where that code step gets really, really powerful because you can just do some small, requests that maybe transform a data from, I don't know, like strip out the, separate all the comma separated entities here, right? Some simple stuff that you don't need to be a, MIT trained engineer to do that kind of thing, right? And so it adds a lot of power for a lot of folks who are maybe amateur programmers, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me, I've done a lot of hackathons and various things, and in the government they don't do hackathons because it's government, and it's so they do data jams,
Yes.
But in government, the whole concept of building an app and quitting your job and being Mark Zuckerberg by Tuesday is not really a concept. So we look for other themes and other ways to do, and one of them was process jams. And it's like, as a worker in government, bring what you do on a daily basis to the jam, and we'll help you refine it, and we'll help you make it better, and we'll help automate it and streamline it. And so that's what MultiSteps and code transformation sounds like to me.
It absolutely is. Like a very specific example of this that you're talking about, we have a user researcher here at Zapier, Eileen, And a big part of her job is like scheduling conversations with customers, right? Like kind of what we're doing now. Like before we set this up, there was like a couple of emails that went back and forth. We picked a date and a time. We set up a link that we were going to go to Hangout, right? There's a whole bunch of just coordination that goes involved in this. What Eileen did with the new MultiStep is she set up a Calendly, which is an app that lets you kind of pick from a list of times and schedule something. So that Calendly entry goes ahead and logs it in Google Calendar. It does a couple formation steps, creates a GoToMeeting scheduled event. It copies the event to a shared Google Calendar that posts to Slack, lets the team know that there's a new scheduled one. It adds it to a Google Sheet so she can see a record of who's coming. It delays it by a certain amount of time before the event, right? So like, hey, 2 days before the event, 1 day before the event, let's go ahead and send a follow-up email to the person and say, hey, reminder, this is happening tomorrow. And then the next day, it posts a message into Slack saying, hey, folks, if you want to come listen to this, user testing session we're going to do, you should come. It's happening right now, right? So here's this thing that she had to do that was really cumbersome in her job, was scheduling and coordinating all this stuff. And she set up this 17-step Zap, and maybe took her like a half an hour or so to set it up. And now she doesn't have to deal with any of that scheduling mess anymore.
That's so huge. I mean, couple things there for me is just thinking through the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like having to be able to break things down into steps like that.
Yep.
Goes a long way in helping you refine and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I was at an education conference in Philly a couple weeks ago, talking to a young lady who she was a digital literacy assistant at university. So she just helped professors, faculty refine what they do every day using digital tools, WordPress, Salesforce, different tools. And basically you guys are an enabler for that type of process. And that's, for me, that's where this really starts. Yay, APIs are cool and exciting and geeky and all this tech and all this, but really where you start empowering people to be more efficient in their daily job, especially in things like higher education or K through 12 or government services winning. So I think it's super important. So as a developer, what do you recommend developers who are, I have a lot of people who know enough just to be dangerous. I really love empowering normals with APIs. So if I'm a curious developer or a hacker, I'm not even a programmer or developer, I'm a hacker, where do I go? What do I do to get going?
Well, I think it comes back to what you were just talking about, right? Like thinking through the process, right? Okay, you've got, what sort of problem are you trying to solve, right? What are the steps that you do today that solve the problem? Is there a set of tools or actions, and not necessarily tools, maybe a set of features, right, that you need? Like, do you need like a file uploader, or do you need like a form bit, or do you need like to send an SMS or send an email or send a whatever, right? Like these bits of functionality do you need? And so once you've kind of laid out what that process is, and it doesn't have to be super formal, you can just know it in your head, right? Like, I need to do these 3 things, or if you want to write it down on paper or a text file or whatever, right? Different strokes for different folks, right? You can do that, but once you know what the process is, then you can like apply that, see what different tools can fill those bits of functionality that you need, right? Upload a file, send an email, send a text message, that's that kind of thing. And then Zapier, you can sign up and just chain those things along, right? So when these events occur, let's go ahead and just chain them along. So that's kind of how I recommend getting started, is just think through that process, think through the things that are like bothering you, or that are taking you a lot of time, and figure out like, are there bits of functionality that would make that easier for you? I like.
So on the say I'm an API provider, and I've advocated this many times, and I've tried to highlight it when I see it, is I go into an API, oh, this is a cool API, they have significant value, their messaging, their document, their something. And then I go in and I see they go, we have Zapier integration, and here's how to take advantage of it. And And I'm like, yeah, that's what I feel like every API provider should have, is that ready to go for the audience we just talked about, that's
Yep.
trying to streamline a process. So
Hmm.
so what advice do you have for those API provider listeners, that where do they go get started? What's
Yeah.
next steps for them?
I think it's the same. It's a lot of the same thing, right? But you kind of abstract it. It's like, okay, what's the core functionality that our service provides, and then what's the functionality that we think our users are going to want to extend to? Like, what are the types of things that they're going to want to extend to? And then that's how you kind of think about, what does our API itself need to provide, right? You're probably going to have like the basic CRUD operations, but what's involved in those payloads? Are we like giving the data that the end user needs, or are we making it like, is there a lot of like, is it really hairy, right? And they have to do a bunch of calls to get data from a whole bunch of different places. Just kind of think through like, what the schema looks like, what is available on different endpoints. Generally, like, the more the merrier, right? From my standpoint, right? As a consumer. And once you kind of know, then you can start, plugging that into Zapier via our developer platform, zapier.com/developer, which has its own slew of documentation for how to make triggers, actions, search actions, and that sort of thing. So I think it comes all the way back to the beginning of the process, right? Which is just think through the use cases that, was core to your app, and then what's the stuff that you want to see in your ecosystem that happens.
See, that just reflects what I think APIs are about. And when people, API providers and consumers, start on this journey and they get down this road, is as API providers, we start with these resources we have, we expose them. Usually our APIs are very CRUD, very simple. But what you guys are doing are forcing people to think about the experience-based design. How is this actually going to be used? Does it have meaning? And which I feel like is 101 for any API strategy. But sadly, very many people I know who don't even think in those terms. They just like expose an API. And so this process goes beyond just the technical and the business. It's how do you think through what you're offering to people and how they're going to experience it.
Exactly, right. And I think this gets at the core of what like API first development is all about, right? Like, if you're building your own services on top of your own API, you're going to kind of know inherently the stuff that you want to do, right? It's like, hey, to build our own app, we need access to these sorts of resources from our backend. So let's start with building out that component of the API. So I think that really helps kind of dog food what your own API should maybe look like. But it's still not going to answer everything, right? Like, you still got to talk to your customers, you got to talk to users, figure out like, okay, hey, you want an API? Why do you want an API endpoint for that? Why does it even matter? And then, okay, you figure out what the use cases are, and it's like, okay, I see what makes sense here.
Well, and I see those conversations, once you start having them, just echoing through your guys' ecosystem. I mean, I've done stuff where I'm like, working through the process, as you said, and I sure hope, sorry, side note, I sure hope the video on this, Google pieces it together, because the video for this sucks. I'm like watching it, but in a way it's Google. But is I've gone in and been like, oh, I want to solve process X, Y, and Z. And then I go in and go, well, wait, how are other people solving X? Because I'm using this form solution, but look, there's like 10 other form solutions. And I wrote a post about this once. This becomes API discovery or platform discovery for me via Zapier and the Zaps that people have created. I'm reverse engineering and evolving my process in ways I never was able to.
Yeah. And, it's one of those things that I think is becoming a competitive advantage for certain, apps and platforms is, when you are, I don't know, a form software, when there's, 15 form softwares that you can provide, well, if you can think about what the experience is like of extending your form software out to other apps, and you can design an experience that's, a user experience that's easy to get started, right? So like, you're using things like OAuth, things that are real time. So you're thinking about webhooks. You're thinking about how to get new data and how to read from old data. Like, you're thinking through these pieces, right? Now you've built like the fundamental tools to provide or build really great experiences on top of your API, versus if you were just like, hey, let's spin up an API. There's a gem, in Rails that lets us make one really quick, right? Like whatever, we'll make that and expose that and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, no, that's just I can keep going on about the benefits to businesses and startups and what you guys. So I mean that kind of lands on for me like, I mean, yay, you guys are going to be around for a little while. Like, I mean, not I was worried about you, but just the space in general as I seen it evolving. There was kind of several different phases. One was more kind of the ETL coming from the enterprise phase, and then not to bash on IFT. I think they have a place, but from a business grade solution, you guys was who I was voting for winning. And so you guys are going to be around a while now because you guys kind of have this base platform, this corpus of information and resources ready to go, this community, and you guys have the money to do it right now, right?
Yeah. And I think, any business, that's kind of what you got to think about, right? Like, unfortunately, like, and I think this is just a challenge, not to say that it's not a challenge worth tackling, but when you look at like the consumer space, the APIs are just really tough in that space because it's tough to get the incentives right, because who's the real customer, who's paying for what, who's doing the things that you need, right? And so you see stuff just kind of disappear overnight all the time. But when you look in B2B, right, like APIs are just a way to give more power to the people who are paying, which are the customers, right? Like they're paying for Salesforce seats or for MailChimp lists or for, sending text messages through Twilio, right? Like that's stuff that they care about. So if you can extend your platform and give more power to them, they're only just going to pay you more money. So that's like the great part about B2B is that like it's a lot easier to get the incentives right in platforms and ecosystems.
Yeah, I think they're just better, more defined because you're running businesses on top of it, and so things should be somewhat defined already rather than just consumers kind of the Wild West. I feel like just for general API evangelism to the masses, that holds true because I try to get people to understand APIs from like we call it a reclaim your domain kind of standpoint. Like how do you own as much of your exhaust from a daily standpoint as possible? My photos, my content, all that. And people, until they reach a pro tier of I'm a photographer, I'm a writer, I need to own and monetize and make money in my world, they generally don't care about like where their data is or losing data. So that business grade, I think, is the beginning level that I'm interested in as well. So so MultiSteps, code transformations and searches, and so what's next? What's the roadmap look like? I mean, you guys have done a lot. It's been a busy year, so I don't mean to apply the pressure.
Yeah.
What's next?
I think there's still a lot of work to kind of polish MultiSteps and code and transformations and things like that. We have, we launched with about I think it was around 15 or 20 apps that had search lookups as search actions. So a big part of it is working with partners in the ecosystem to get broader kind of adoption of search lookups, because it's going to be something that really creates a lot of power for people who are wanting to set up this type of automation. So I think that's a big part. And then I think another big key for us is really thinking through how people kind of deploy and maintain Zaps in like a team setting, right? Zapier is starting to be used for a lot more mission critical use cases. So we have to start thinking through like, okay, what happens if, teammates leave or like edits need to be made? How can these be done in kind of safe environments, right? So it's kind of thinking through and applying some of the best practices that you see in like, code like Git and things like that. It's like, how can you apply Git concepts to like this thing that is being used by people who aren't Git experts?
Yeah, no, that's I mean, from my standpoint, I see a Venn diagram of several areas that I said why I track on you. I call you guys reciprocity because I think you maintain the integrity of the relationship between a user and the platform, and then platform to platform. I think there's some OAuth concepts there that you guys really adhere to from a business contract standpoint that I think is healthy. You guys do well in that. But then lifecycle orchestration, things that are going on with how do you move the bits and bytes around? How do you schedule that? How do you audit that? How do you log that? How do you transform along the way? You guys are really feeding into that, which I think helps with the DevOps to what I would call BizOps, is
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you, how does that savvy business owner that took over Salesforce when Bob left 2 years ago now know, but she's really not a coder or architect or anything,
Yep.
how does she do more? All the way to bots,
Mm-hmm.
like I really feel like some of the bot movement, like everyone gets excited over bots and AI, and
Yeah.
geeks look way too fast forward. You guys are it playing out in real time, I would say. How do you actually create meaningful bot actions,
Yeah.
searches into dictionaries and corpuses of content? I see you guys as being that. So that's kind of my big picture. Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bot stuff is super fun and super interesting, right? I think Slack has done a great job at, demonstrating how powerful bots can be. Um, they've really gotten people thinking about this, and not just engineers, right? They've got just regular people, who are just thinking about messaging and chat as a platform and stuff like that. And so we've seen all sorts of cool stuff being done with bots on Zapier. Like, I mean, just a few that we've done internally at Zapier. We have like joke telling bots, so you can like do slash command that's like, tell a dad joke, right? And it will spit out a joke based on this. There's this whole set of, jokes that we've got repository somewhere, and it'll just, echo one back to you.
Nice.
You can play games, right? Like we have games that are built into Zapier. There's this, if anyone's ever played this game Spyfall, we built it with Slack commands. You can say, hey, Slack Spyfall, start a game with these 5 people, right? And then sends messages and DMs to the people that need to be involved, right? So that's like pretty cool. We've got like who is lookup stuff. So you can say like, who is, this domain, spit back all the information, or who is this email address, spit back more information, or who is this Twitter account, spit back information that is associated with those accounts, right? Um, look up data in our, data repo and spit back graphs. Like I want to see how this A/B test is doing, spit back the charts how it's running. It's like this kind of like on demand, I almost think of it as like on demand search for like your internal data, right? It's like Google for stuff that is behind a login somewhere, right? And these bots are really powerful at basically reporting that information back to you when you call for it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the things I'm kind of shifting, I've been doing API Evangelist for 5 years now, and I'm kind of shifting. And me and my girlfriend works in education space. She has a blog called Hack Education. But we're big on digital literacy. So like in March, we're going out to Davidson College and talking to freshmen and to, well, two different, one to students about how to, own your own shit online and be in control of your worlds from a professional standpoint. And one
Yep.
is to the faculty about APIs and power of APIs on campus. So multi-front, but that's that digital literacy that you guys afford as far as talking through processes, learning about what
Mm-hmm.
platforms, being able to pull back the curtain and answer questions that you need answered. All of that I feel is super critical. And honestly, in my experience, most people could care less when you say, well, where's your personal data stored? And, and they're like gloss over. But if you
Yep.
make a game,
Mm-hmm.
that shows APIs exist and then give them something to do, they run with that. So when it comes to teaching, K through 12 as well as college level about digital literacy and where your stuff resides, what you guys are doing, I think, is going to be critical to the next step. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's where toys are like great, right? When you're working with younger folks who's shorter attention spans, right? Toys are fun, they're interesting, they're engaging, and then all of a sudden, it's like, hey, how can I make one of these myself? Hey, what else could I do with this sort of thing? And then before you know it, there's like really powerful stuff being built, and it's being applied for, really powerful problems that the world needs solved.
well, relevant
Hmm.
relevant problems too.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yep.
to
Hmm.
your world as an individual, here's things that I can orchestrate and solve and do that
Hmm.
matter to me. And
Exactly.
and I think that's the important piece of what you guys are doing. So
Hmm.
well, that's 30 minutes. That's kind of, I think, most people's attention spans. But I would love to do this again, in 6 months or something, or,
Yeah.
I'll coordinate with your team. But I really feel like this is an important year. I feel like a groundswell of people are getting to know what APIs are,
Hmm.
understanding the potential, and you guys are kind of that playground for that, as well as the real world, I think, playground for it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So, well, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Anything you want to leave people on, or?
No, I don't think so. I mean, check out MultiSteps Zaps. You can go to Zapier.com. We got a link to it from the homepage. It's a lot of fun. If you're an API provider, check out the dev platform. We'd love to have you on the platform.
Great. Well, and I'm going to keep talking you guys up. I mean, you guys are literally, the logo next to, the poster child for when I talk about this subject, or when I do my talk out at Davidson College next month, you guys will be
Nice.
referenced. So
Yeah, we really
keep
appreciate it,
up,
Ken.
yeah, keep up the good work. And also to anybody watching this, if you have any questions about how to use or why, I have, I'm happy to help as well as just reach out to them. They're very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, man. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
All right. Cheers. Where'd it go?